Welcome back. I thought it might be interesting to do a series on Australian deadly duos. Most of us have heard of the more famous cases, such as the Morehouse murders and the Truro killing fields. But I thought I'd begin with some of the lesser known cases, those that didn't receive as much media coverage, but whose victims deserve to be remembered. Alan Baker and Kevin Crump were both in their mid-20s when they met and became friends. They were inmates at Grafton Jail in New South Wales, and until that point had been convicted of crimes that included theft, break-and-enters and armed hold-ups. It has been suggested that during their time in prison, the pair became more than just friends, but that has never been confirmed. Alan Baker was an ex-Army Reserve, having joined in the 1960s. He developed a love of guns, particularly rifles. Kevin Crump has been described as illiterate, slow, and easily led by others. Baker was released from prison first and began work on a rural farm in New South Wales. When released, his ex-prison buddy Crump came to visit. Crump was driving a stolen vehicle. Baker loaded his belongings into the stolen car and the pair set off on a road trip, heading toward the town of Goondiwindi. There they purchased a .308 rifle, ammunition and 2 balaclavas and set out on a life of crime together. On November 3rd, 1973, 43-year-old Ian Lamb was looking for seasonal work and was sleeping in his car to save costs on accommodation. In a tragic case of being in the wrong place at the wrong time, Baker and Crump spotted Lamb's car parked on the side of the road at Narrabri in northwestern New South Wales. They slowly approached and saw the sleeping man. The car window was down, and in what Baker would later describe as a spur-of-the-moment decision, he aimed the newly acquired rifle at Lamb's face and shot him 4 times. Lamb died instantly. Crump and Baker searched Lamb's car and took keys, clothes and money before moving his body to the passenger side and covering it with blankets. Not wanting to leave any evidence, the pair cleaned the crime scene of the spent bullet casings before driving Lamb's vehicle to a more remote location so he would not be found immediately. They wiped the car of any fingerprints, then returned to their own car and drove off as if nothing had happened. It was a number of days before Lamb's body was found. It was in the initial stages of decomposition. Brian and Virginia Morse were a married couple who lived on a property in the quiet town of Collarenebri, New South Wales, with their 3 children. 35-year-old Virginia, known as Ginny to friends and family, met Brian Morse in the 1950s. He proposed when Virginia was just 20 years old. They married in 1959 and moved into Brian's family property near the town of Collarenebri. Virginia eventually gave birth to a baby girl, Eloise, followed a few years later by 2 sons, Adrian and Robbie. As well as raising 3 children and running the family homestead, Virginia Morse was very involved in her local community, joining the Red Cross and the Country Women's Association. Brian Morse worked in agriculture, including ploughing and harvesting, and he often hired seasonal workers to work on the property. Alan Baker had actually been one of those casual labourers. Baker spent several months working for the Morses, eating meals with the family and playing with the 3 young children. On the morning of November 6th, 1973, Virginia's husband took the 3 children to catch the school bus, then went into the town of Murray to attend to some business. Virginia was home alone. What they didn't know was that Baker and Crump had been staking out the house, lurking on the outskirts of the property for the last 2 days. Baker and Crump saw Brian and the children leave that morning and took it as their chance. They entered the house and threatened Virginia with the rifle, telling her to do what they said. They bound, blindfolded and gagged her, before stealing $30 in cash and some of Brian's rifles, and loading Virginia into their stolen vehicle. One of them drove Virginia's car to an abandoned police station nearby, before driving their car towards Queensland, taking predominantly back roads to avoid detention. They made several stops along the way, mostly for beer and petrol. All the while, Virginia was begging and pleading for her life. They eventually drove down a remote side track just south of the Queensland border and dragged Virginia from the vehicle. They tied her hands around a tree behind her back and tied each of her legs to 2 separate trees. Still gagged and blindfolded, Virginia was tortured and sexually assaulted by both Crump and Baker. She continued to cry and beg to be released, but in the remoteness of the bush, nobody could hear her pleas for help. They then untied and threw her back into the vehicle before continuing on their journey, eventually pulling over to rest for the night. Back in Collarenebri, Virginia's children, Adrian and Robbie, got off the school bus to wait for their mother. The bus stop was on one side of a river and the Moores property was on the other, so Virginia would often row across to collect them. The boys waited for an hour, but there was no sign of their mother. Adrian eventually swam across the river, collected the rowboat, and rowed back across to get his little brother, finally arriving home at around 7 p.m. Brian phoned the home, and Adrian told him that their mother hadn't been there to pick them up after school, and that she still was not home. At first, Brian thought that perhaps Virginia had gone out to visit a friend and lost track of time, particularly as her car wasn't there. By 9:30 p.m, Brian was becoming concerned and began calling friends and family to ask if they'd seen Virginia. At this point, he noticed that 3 of his rifles were missing and contacted police. Virginia's car was eventually located at the abandoned police station, and both Brian and the police now believed that Virginia had been abducted. Kevin Crump and Alan Baker make their final stop, driving down a disused side track that led to the Weir River near the town of Moonee in Queensland. It is early in the morning, and a sleep-deprived Virginia is once again dragged from the car, tied up as she was before, tortured and sexually assaulted by both men again. Exactly what happened to Virginia Morse at the river is unknown, as the details of this case were suppressed due to the distressing details. At this point, Kevin Crump grabbed a gun and aimed it at Virginia, who is still gagged and blindfolded. Crump fires a fatal shot between Virginia's eyes, execution style. The 2 men then roll her body into the nearby river and cover it in branches and rocks, before burning her clothes in an effort to destroy any evidence. They then drive back to the farm campsite in New South Wales, where the pair originally met up after being released from prison. In the meantime, police are trying everything they can to locate Virginia Morse, but with no leads or motive, they're not having any luck. The search intensified as the days passed, with additional resources being brought into the small town from Sydney. Locals pitched in with the search, and farmers used their small aircrafts to search the local area. Virginia's disappearance soon reaches national headlines, and appeals for information are broadcast across radio and television. Police interviewed a number of people, including half the town of Collarenebri. Brian Morse is trying to think of anyone that may have had a motive to abduct his wife. He gives police a list of all the casual labourers that had worked on his property in the past. One of the names strikes a chord with police due to his criminal history: Alan Baker. Several witnesses actually claim to have seen Alan Baker in the area around the time Virginia disappeared, so police make his name and face public. Meanwhile, Crump and Baker are back on the farm where they have been working as casual labourers, continuing as if nothing has happened. It's not long, however, before the pair get a hankering to commit more crimes together. On November the 13th, Crump and Baker decide to go on another road trip, this time to the New South Wales Hunter Valley, to commit burglary on another home they're familiar with. However, during the attempted burglary, the pair realise that their stolen vehicle has been recognised and attempt to flee the scene. The stolen vehicle had actually been originally taken from this area by Crump, so it was rather foolish to bring the vehicle back to the scene of the crime. Unbeknown to Crump and Baker, the police had already been told that they were attempting to flee the scene of a burglary. A responding police officer spots the pair and a high-speed chase began. Police still believe they are chasing the pair for a stolen vehicle and attempted burglary. Crump and Baker ram the first police vehicle, running it off the road, but they are soon pursued by a second. Crump is driving and Baker is actually shooting at police officers from the speeding car. Suddenly, Crump pulls the car over and police pull up next to him. Baker grabs his rifle and aims, shooting the police officer in the forehead. The officer, whose name was Bill Millward, survived but was seriously injured. He would later receive the Queen's Commendation Award for brave conduct in his efforts on that day. At this point, more police were called for backup. The chase finally came to a halt in the suburb of Woodville, where the pair fled from the car into nearby bush, continuing to shoot at police. Within 3 hours, Kevin Crump and Alan Baker were arrested, found in a nearby river, attempting to hide under reeds. Police were initially baffled as to why a pair of car thieves would go to such great lengths to escape, but after searching the pair's car, they understood. Inside, they found items belonging to Ian Lamb, the man that had recently been found shot dead in his car. No immediate connection is made between them and Virginia Morse, until investigators did a background check on the rifles they had and realised 3 of them had been stolen from the Morse home on the day Virginia was abducted. Following this discovery, Crump and Baker were interrogated in relation to the abduction and suspected death of Virginia Morse. When confronted with the evidence, Kevin Crump was the first to confess. When Alan Baker was told of his friend's confession, he also confessed, but unsurprisingly, the two blamed each other. The day after their confessions, they led police to the body of Virginia Morse. Police were horrified when they discovered what Virginia had been through in her final hours. The small community of Collarenebri were devastated, particularly because it wasn't unusual in the area for men to leave their wives on rural, isolated properties alone. A memorial for Virginia was held in the town, attended by around 700 people. Baker and Crump were both charged with the death of Ian James Lamb, conspiracy to kill Virginia Morse, and maliciously wounding a police officer. Both men pled not guilty to all 4 charges. In his police statement, Kevin Crump claimed that Alan Baker had forced him to kill Virginia Morse and Ian Lamb, stating that Baker wanted him to be in as deep as he was. He said Baker was going to kill him if he didn't. He admitted that he was prepared to kidnap Mrs. Morse, but, as with Mr. Lamb, he did not want to be a part of murder. During the trial, held at the Supreme Court of New South Wales, the details of the abduction and death of Virginia Morse were suppressed due to the graphic nature of what had happened to her. It took the jury just 1 hour and 45 minutes to find both men guilty on all 4 charges. Both showed little to no emotion as the verdict was read. If you noticed, none of the charges were related to the actual murder of Virginia Morse, only the conspiracy to kill her. Despite the fact that there was evidence that both Crump and Baker had killed Virginia, it was out of the jurisdiction of the Government of New South Wales, meaning Crump and Baker could not be charged with her death. On completion of any New South Wales sentencing, they could be extradited to Queensland to face the charge of her murder, but since both were sentenced to 56 years in prison and will likely never be released, that seems unlikely to ever happen. The pair were initially jailed within the same prison, but after a public outcry were separated. In 1997, a legislation passed in the Parliament of New South Wales with the purpose of naming 10 incarcerated individuals who should never be released. Baker and Crump were named, along with the killers of Anita Cobby. Baker unsuccessfully challenged the legislation, and Crump also tried to appeal unsuccessfully. Thankfully, these two will never be released from prison. Stacey Mitchell was born in 1990 in the village of Westmoors in Dorset, England. When she was 10 years old, Stacey's family decided to move to Australia and start a new life here. At 16, a mutual friend introduced Stacey to Jessica Stazanowski, 20, and Valerie Parashumti, 19, who were dating. The innocent introduction would prove to be fatal. It's almost a rite of passage for teenagers to be at loggerheads with their parents, and on December 7th, 2006, Stacey decided to run away from home. She was reported missing by her parents on December 13th. Needing somewhere to stay, the lure of her new friends and a vacant room was a compelling combination. On December 14th, she moved into the front bedroom of the house shared by Jessica and Valerie and 27-year-old David Haynes in the inner Perth suburb of Lathlane. The naive 16-year-old had no hint of the troubled and bizarre background of her new friends. Jessica Stazanowski was described by a friend as a beautiful person before she met her lover. She'd allegedly had a lonely childhood that had rendered her emotionally barren. Her parents divorced in 2004, and she also suffered head injuries in a car accident around that time. She'd run away from home, lived on the streets, used drugs, and made cash through prostitution. Valerie Parashmunti was the eldest of 4 children and originally from Kosovo. Valerie's penchant for bloodletting and for blood drinking had apparently been a long time coming. Growing up, things weren't easy. She came from a dysfunctional and violent family background. She had been experimenting with drinking blood since the age of 10, drinking her own blood after cutting herself. When she grew older, she started to drink other people's blood. A psychologist would later tell the West Australian Supreme Court that she also had strong sexual sadistic tendencies and was sexually aroused by physical torture and violence. Within a day of Stacey's arrival, the pair were already plotting her murder. Stacey had a habit of walking round the house in her underwear, which both her new friends took as flirting, and friction between the couple quickly developed. Jessica believed Stacey was deliberately flirting with Valerie, and her feelings for Stacey rapidly turned to hate. Valerie felt the need to prove that Stacey meant nothing to her, so she and Jessica both decided she had to go. A little later that day, their housemate, David Haynes, saw Jessica grinding glass in a mortar and pestle. When he asked what it was for, she didn't hold back, telling him that it was to go into one of Stacey's drinks. An agonising way to die, she assured him. Haynes at first thought she was joking. When both women tried to garner his help in their murderous plot, he declined, but he made no attempt to thwart their actions or alert the young girl. In a sad irony, only hours before her death, Stacey had reconciled with her parents. In a phone call, they arranged to collect her from the Success railway station the next day. In the early hours of December 18th, Stazanowski gave Stacey a pill purported to be ecstasy, but she later told Haynes it was a date rape drug. It was the prelude to murder. Valerie told Haynes to lock himself in his bedroom and turn the music up loud. The women were in the kitchen drinking whiskey and dropping Stilnox tablets. Stacey was painfully unaware of what was about to happen. Even with the music blasting loudly through his headphones, David Haynes heard someone yell, "Now, now, now," followed by a thud and a cry of help from Stacey. He fled the house. Valerie had come from behind, striking Stacey about the head with a concrete paving slab. Hurt, stunned and in disbelief, Stacey tried to escape to a bedroom, but the violent assault continued, even after the concrete slab broke in two. Jessica then joined the attack, taking off her dog chain belt and using it to strangle the now semi-conscious teenager. It took an agonising 45 minutes for Stacey to die. To heighten the brutality of their crime, the pair made a mobile phone video of the murder scene, complete with a narration in which they mocked Stacey's English accent and made disparaging comments. In a sickening level of depravity, the pair kissed and caressed over Stacey's bloodied body, before dumping her into a wheelie bin and leaving it in a shed at the rear of the property. David Haynes returned to the house at 3:20 a.m, and the three later went to a nearby Bunnings store, pricing a chainsaw and shovels. 4 days later, police arrived looking for the teenager who had been reported missing by her parents. Neighbours had also complained of a smell coming from the house. Police discovered Stacey's body in the wheelie bin, and a further search uncovered the grisly footage of the murder. All three occupants of the house were arrested. With the overwhelming evidence against them, the girls pleaded guilty to Stacey's murder. Prisoner Rochelle Van Ross was placed in a cell at Bandy Up Prison with Valerie Parajmunti. She gave a statement to the Perth Supreme Court that Valerie had told her about the murder, saying it was so hot that they had to make out. She said, "As soon as it started, I wasn't me. I have never felt that kind of lust for blood before. Something in me changed. The feel of her blood sprayed all over me was almost a romantic, animalistic lust. I don't know when or how. All I know is something in me felt in place." Throughout the hearings, Parashmunti and Stasinowski irked both the judge and the public with their smirking, talking and snickering. In March 2008, both were sentenced to strict security life imprisonment with a minimum of 24 years to be served. The judge remarked, "You have both had more than a year in custody to reflect on the evilness of your crime, yet you still lack remorse and obviously place no value on the sanctity of human life." David Haynes received a 2-year sentence for being an accessory. In 2009, the West Australian newspaper reported that the two women continued their relationship while in prison. Because of the public outcry, Valerie Parashumti was moved from Bandiup to Greenock Regional Prison. The two decided to try and continue to be lovers through mail, using none other than convicted serial killer Catherine Burney as an intermediary. This was soon also uncovered. Jessica Stasinowski subsequently appealed her sentence, which was unanimously rejected by the West Australian Court of Appeal in 2013. Valerie Parashumti attempted to escape from prison but failed to leave the grounds. In 2032, just 12 years from now, both will be eligible for parole. Thanks for watching, and remember to subscribe for more murder, mystery and mayhem. Until next time.